Thank you, everyone, for attending. Probably, if you are here, is because you have read this fantastic piece that Kim wrote about this research and about the mystery behind these radiation levels. But just in case, a little bit of context. Back in 2017, I presented Go Nuclear Breaking Radiation Monitoring Devices, where I presented a very specific attack scenario where the malicious actor would be transmitting fabricated data or fabricated radiation levels in order to simulate a radiation leak. Then in February, we all know what happened. Ukraine reported radiation spikes in Chernobyl. Then a year ago, I received an intriguing message from a nuclear engineer who has an extensive experience in Chernobyl, and he managed to connect the dots between these radiation levels and my previous research. So a big shout out to JJ. The French Institute for Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety basically stated that they couldn't find any coherent explanation to these radiation spikes, and their preferred explanation instead was a technical malfunction. According to them, this explanation was also supported by the International Atomic Organization Energy Agency and its international partners. Then in April, an academic paper was also published that basically reached the same conclusion. The Chernobyl spikes cannot be explained by the resuspension of soil theory. It's interesting because this is the worst radiological event after Fukushima, according to the reported levels. But for some reason, there hasn't been any kind of public investigation into this. So basically, this is a data-driven research. I'm talking about electromagnetism, nuclear physics, reverse engineering. My opinion is completely irrelevant. The only important aspect of this research is that it can be independently verified. The sole purpose of this research is to provide sufficient technical evidence in case in the future we may see an investigation on these events initiated. Obviously, you may guess that having access to this kind of software and equipment for an independent security researcher is kind of complicated, so I would like to thank the public universities that enabled me to access that kind of equipment. All the information or all the evidence here presented has been obtained by different means: open source intelligence, hardware, software, reverse engineering, also the data analysis of the radiation levels scraped from the EcoCenter website, but by Save EcoBot. Also, thank you to Pablo Tachenko. And please read the paper if you are really interested in this presentation, because it's impossible to cover the full extent of this research in 40 minutes. Let's move to physical part. Basically, you can see here different pictures of the same place. On the left, you can see the checkpoint Lelif engulfed by an intense smoke plume, and on the right, during the Russian invasion. The point here is that the same radiation monitoring network that detected brutal spikes during the Russian invasion didn't detect any during the previous event in April 2020, which is weird. I'm not going to say anything new about the Chernobyl accident. Basically, the resuspension process in the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone is not a homogeneous process because there are different zones with different deposition levels. The interesting thing here is that some of the highest spikes were detected in low deposition zones, which initially is also weird. The resuspension process itself has been defined and studied in different papers. One of the most complete ones is this one, the contamination of surfaces by resuspended material. We are going to analyze some of the conclusions that are expressed in this paper because they are really important to assess our scenario. Basically, the idea we should keep in mind is that the physical processes that had to take place in the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone to give any opportunity to the resuspension of soil theory is basically the exact opposite of what has been described by scientific publications. Basically, the traffic-induced resuspension is a local event. It doesn't have the ability to transport resuspended materials over long distances. Also, the resuspension factor decreases exponentially when the soil moisture increases. As you may guess, Chernobyl in winter is not a dry place, so probably not the best environment. Traffic is also important because that's the root cause. Basically, in a contaminated road, after an initial period where the traffic is going through this road, basically there are no materials left to be resuspended because the initial traffic resuspends the materials, and then these materials are moved to the sides of the road. In addition to this, we have that in the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, the roads have been decontaminated since 1989, and in the last 30 years, a large number of vehicles have been going through the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone. Now let's move to the sewer part. Back in 2007, under the umbrella of the European Commission, the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone was endowed with a brand new automatic radiation monitoring network, which was comprised of different items. Not all stations are equipped with the same devices. Here you can see a map that comes from Ukraton Pilat, which is a Ukrainian company involved in that deployment. This example shows one of the most complete ones. We can see the gamma tracer. We can see a legacy area monitor, which is deprecated. It's a wired monitor, and it's not used anymore. And then we have the aerosol analysis unit, which basically pumps air into a special kind of fabric, which is the Petrianol filter, that is able to capture the cesium-137 or any other radionuclide present in the air. The gamma tracer itself is a high-end device. It's far from being simple. It contains several components that we are going to see, but it has been deployed for many years in different nuclear facilities all around the world. It's an autonomous device. It contains 2 batteries, and this is important because, contrary to what has been published, the power cuts that affected Chernobyl didn't affect this device. The nuclear detector that is inside this device is, depending on the model, but the ones that were present in Chernobyl were containing 2 energy-compensated Vacuum-Tech Geiger-Müller tubes without any window, so they are only responding to high-energy ionization events coming from gamma radiation or X-rays. Here you can see the internal electronics of the gamma tracer, and there are several components that should be mentioned. First, on the left, we have the real-time clock. This is in charge of controlling or generating the timestamps. This is important. The timestamps are generated locally. Then we have a static RAM where the readings are located. So this device has the capability to transmit the readings, but also this device stores the readings, the radiation levels, locally. Then we have the MCU. You can see also part of the circuit for signal conditioning of the Geiger-Müller tubes. And then we have a custom chip, which is intended to interface between the MCU and different sensors. It provides some intra-board functionality, but it's a custom chip, so probably there are more functionalities we are not aware of. Well, it's important to mention that the radiation levels are measured during 60 minutes under normal conditions, and then an average is calculated and transmitted and internally logged. Under emergency conditions, when the control level is exceeded, the gamma tracer automatically moves into emergency mode and changes the cycle to just 2 minutes. Regarding the transmission of the information, they are using as a custom radio frequency protocol. Just 2 things we should be aware of is that the data blocks contain a CRC, because we are discussing electromagnetic potential interference, and it's a transmission-only protocol. I reverse engineering the gamma tracer protocol that can be, you can talk with this device over a serial module or infrared. Basically, there are two main functionalities. It is possible to dump the internal readings, and this is a documented feature. I reverse engineered the protocol, but this is documented. And then there are other functionalities that are not so obvious that can be used to perform some kind of anti-forensics. We can reset the internal storage, and we are deleting the readings, and we can update the firmware to wipe memory, for instance. The central processing station is where everything happens. We have the base station that collects, decodes, and transmits the received signals from the gamma tracers to the data expert software, which stores these values in a database and presents the interface to the operator or other users. And now let's move to explain why these spikes are completely unphysical. There is a crucial detail that was overlooked by pretty much everyone and most media outlets. The official figures that were reported were a specific operational quantity for area monitoring. Because in the stories that were published, the most common sentence was increased radiation levels, but that sentence is subject to many interpretations. So it's important to know the kind of dose rate we are talking about. Taking into account this, it is immediately discounted the ability to resuspend materials and create a scenario where those spikes are detected, because this is a well-known physical fact. This is documented in many different places. You can see here an example of the IAEA document to calculate the operational intervention levels, which are using this operational quantity. And basically, you can see that they say that the doses from the resuspended material are not significant contributors. There was, however, an expert who spotted this difference, and his analysis was spot on, basically because he said, okay, we may have a slight increase in the aerosols in the air, but that doesn't mean that the ambient dose equivalent is going to be increased as well. And that's the whole point of this issue. You can see here the official document that the Ukraine's Eco Center published to introduce the theory of the resuspension of soil. Basically, the explanation is that the upper layer of the soil was in equilibrium, and somehow this intense traffic of heavy military vehicles upset the equilibrium, and then the gamma radiation escaped, or something like that, and created the scenario for the spikes. This, I know that those were difficult times, obviously, but this theory it contradicts everything that has been published about the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone. So basically, there is a significant piece of information that directly debunks this theory. The vertical distribution of the cesium-137 in the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone follows an exponential profile, as you can see in the graph. Basically, up to 90% of the cesium activity is located in the top layer of the soil. So there is no need to remove the soil. There is no need to upset the soil to receive the main contribution from this upper layer. That's the point. Gamma radiation interacts with matter according to the Beer-Lambert law, and there is basically no attenuation. In just several centimeters of already contaminated materials, there is no attenuation for a deeper layer of gamma radiation that doesn't even exist. This is also a well-known physical fact documented in many other places. But even if we assume that the spikes were real, the timings don't match. You can see here a timeline of the events during a period of intense traffic activity. There were no spikes detected. However, right 10 minutes after the Ukrainian regulator formally announced that they had lost control of the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, the first radiation spikes were detected, which is relevant, obviously. You can see a video, probably maybe you already watched it, of a Russian convoy going through checkpoint Leliv. Along the way of this convoy, we could find a radiation monitoring station, Kopachi, that didn't detect any spike until more than 12 hours later after this convoy passed nearby. There is another piece of information that could be extracted from this video, which is pretty interesting. The vehicles are passing through a radiation portal monitor, actually. This radiation portal monitor contains 3 different lights that can provide a visual indication of normal levels of gamma radiation or background radiation. According to the video, we can't really see any visual alarm, but obviously the quality of the video is not the best. I don't want to speculate on this, but the important part is that these radiation portal monitors are part of a different radiation network that is intended to implement the non-proliferation controls, and this, the gamma radiation and the gamma background levels are sent to a central server. There is no information whether the server containing these readings were recovered or analyzed. Another statement from the IRSN regarding the gamma tracer and the forest fires that happened in the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone in 2020 literally says that the gamma tracer are not capable of detecting major radiological accidents, and they provide a reference figure, which is 1 becquerel per cubic meter, and that's very important because that gave me the idea to develop a mathematical model to first make sure that I wasn't missing something, and to demonstrate that there is no physical explanation to this kind of spikes. Well, basically, the formal definition of the ambient dose equivalent says that it's the sum of all particles detected in the aligned and expanded field. So this additive property can or allows us to decompose the ambient dose equivalent into 2 different components. The idea is pretty simple. We can define a spike as follows. We have the baseline level, which is the regular level the gamma tracer is measuring, and then we should have some kind of additional amount of radioactivity which is creating the scenario for the spike. And that, according to the official explanation, as it's happening from a resuspension activity, it should be air. So let's see an example calculation. We have that Buryakovska reached a spike of 52.7 microsievert, and the regular baseline level for this station was 2.7 microsievert. Just by subtracting these values, we get an air component of 50 microsievert. At this point, 50 microsievert is just crazy. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. But let's continue with the model. Basically, we have to include some kind of specific functionality from the gamma tracer, which is deployed in Chernobyl. You can see here, this graph comes from the official data sheet of the Vacutech Geiger-Müller tubes, and you can see that the relationship between the pulse rate and the dose rate is linear. So this is important for the mathematical model. Basically, this is the development of the expression that we should be able to validate. You can read all the explanation in the paper that's there, but the idea is that we have the airborne activity of the cesium-137 recorded during the forest fires of 2020. During those forest fires, there were no reports of spikes, but during the Russian invasion, we do have reports of many spikes. The problem is that for the period of the Russian invasion, we don't have the airborne activities of the cesium-137 because the Petrenov filters couldn't be recovered, apparently for reasons. So, to validate this expression, I need to estimate 81, which is the value that we can't really have because of this problem with the Petrenov filters. But I found a way to realistically approximate this value using official figures from the IAEA. Basically, the IAEA responding to the claims that the Russians were digging trenches in the vicinity of the Red Forest. Once the Russians withdrew from the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, the IAEA performed some measurements and published these values. So basically by multiplying the specific activity and the concentration of dust, we can realistically approximate 81. It's just an order of magnitude higher than the top airborne concentration in the forest fires, so it doesn't make any sense. You can see, again, the explanation in the paper. Another question this model raises is why the stations return to the baseline levels. Because if we have, because how it's possible to achieve higher levels of radioactivity just by resuspending the same materials that are located in the ground, in the top layer of the ground. There are two options, or we have an external release from an unknown source of radioactivity, or a resuspension activity with a massive transport involved. The first option is discounted totally. The second option apparently is what could happen, but if this is the case, why the stations returned to the baseline levels? Because if we have two places and we are taking a significant amount of material from one place to another, the stations around this place should return to a lower baseline level, and the stations that receive this additional input of radioactivity should return to a higher baseline level. Obviously, under the paradigm of the resuspension of soil, this is impossible to be explained, because what has been reported in Chernobyl is basically an unprecedented case in nuclear physics. It's an unbalanced resuspension without a deposition phase, which is something really crazy. And the previous paper I mentioned, literally in one sentence, debunks also this theory. In resuspension deposition equilibrium, gains from one side equal losses on the other side, which is something pretty intuitive. Again, I also, in the paper, you can see an analytical point of view for this issue. Now let's move to the technical analysis of the plausible cyber operation. There are several anomalies that add the proper context to this plausible cyber operation. Basically, the Ukrainian regulator reported only 6 specific values to the IAEA. During the 24th, there were many spikes, and there were spikes that were higher than these ones. I don't know why these values were reported, but let's see if there is some kind of pattern or something. There is an additional thing that is interesting, because all the levels can be found in the dataset coming from the Ecocenter map, except one. I don't know how this value ended up in the official documentation, but that specific value for Chernobyl station never appeared in the Ecocenter website. One of the main questions also is why the Ukrainian regulator only reported those values and not the values that were way higher. We have for instance, these 3 spikes that reported, or these 3 stations that reported the spikes that were way beyond the operational levels of the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone. And it's interesting because then this is the only assessment the IAEA performed on these reported spikes. But I can say, I think that it's an optimistic assessment, because they basically considered only the reported spikes that were officially reported to them by the Ukrainian regulator, and they didn't take into consideration the specific stations, just the levels. So basically, what they said is that, or what they did is that they assessed the radiation level as low, but they didn't compare the different stations and the different values. And they included a graph, and I could find the stations that were reported in that graph, and the stations don't match, basically. So that's the only assessment, and as you can see, they assessed the situation as low when the rest of the general public was observing brutal spikes that were not assessed. This another anomaly is, for me, is one of the most important ones, because the only explanation I could find is something that directly points to data manipulation. Basically, these two different stations are 49 kilometers apart, and on December 23rd, 2020, they started to report the same values at the same timestamps. Obviously, this is kind of a configuration issue that was prolonged in time, but the interesting thing is that the only two times when these stations reported different timestamps, different levels at different timestamps, were approximately 1 month before the spikes and during the spikes. I recommend you to read the paper, because this is really interesting. This is a unique pattern. There was another radiation monitoring station that didn't detect any spike, while at the same time the Ecocenter radiation monitoring station were detecting many spikes in the same area. Again, this is difficult to explain from a physical point of view. There are 4 different patterns. Each of the stations that reported spikes follows one of these 4 spikes, 4 different patterns. This is a graph of the stations, the timestamps, and the spikes. As you can see, this is clearly structured, so this is not what you expect from a naturally occurring ionization process, obviously. Just for instance, you can see that the 3 highest levels detected in Chernobyl happened at the same timestamps. The first one at 9:50, and the second one at 10:40, and the 25th. When putting things together, or when putting all the pieces together, things start to make sense. Basically, the only available, or the single source of information was the Ecocenter map. And the way this map works is as follows. If a new reading is available, the map is updated. Otherwise, the map is keeping the last received reading. There was something that puzzled everyone, which is that the stations, right after reporting a spike, went offline. That's not true, because as we can see, only the stations that reported spikes were offline. The stations that didn't report any spike were transmitting regular levels at the expected rate. So this is how the plausible data manipulation worked. Basically, a fabricated spike is generated by software and then injected into the data expert level, and this spike is then populated to the Ecocenter website. Legitimate readings are still coming from the gamma tracer, so they have to be blocked in order to prevent the Ecocenter map from being updated. So that's why the stations went offline. The Ecocenter radiation map will keep showing the last received value. So in this way, the actors behind this plausible operation were able to control the way, or control the information this map was presenting, was depicting at the specific times. We have to take into account that this map was the single source of information for official entities, millions of people, and media outlets. So basically, they were able to control the perception of people that people were getting from the physical conditions in the Chernobyl exclusion zones. Then we are going to analyze the potential attack scenarios. There are 3 different patterns that denote the intentionality behind this operation, or this potential data manipulation. We have the timestamps, which, as you can see, these timestamps are really weird. The stations reported up to 10 stations reported at the same timestamp, and these stations were separated by tens of kilometers, something really weird. Then we have the online-offline pattern, which is the structured patterns. and the radiation levels. And you can see here in this table the different scenarios and the assessment with regards to the ability to explain these three different patterns. As you can see, the only viable attack scenario is the malware. The remaining ones, the Skylink spoofing, as we are going to see, it's plausible, but very complicated. It's a very complex approach and prone to errors. So we are going to address the electromagnetic attacks that could potentially create these scenarios. Basically, well, this can be totally discounted, but I want this research may attract readers from, or might attract the interest from people outside the infosecurity field. Obviously, it's impossible to create non-transient with events such as changing databases or changing values in a database with surgical precision. That's not something we can really assess. Regarding the unintentional electromagnetic attacks, well, that's plausible that there were some radio frequency sources impacting the Skylink channel, but as we mentioned, the Skylink channel is including a CRC, so this unintentional electromagnetic pattern should be able to modify a custom radio frequency protocol and update the CRC, which is obviously extremely unlikely. They also have to control or to modify or corrupt only the selected beacons that were reporting spikes. We have another scenario, which is the radio frequency induced voltage. I think that this is potentially possible in a controlled scenario, targeting one device at a time in the near field, which is very important because basically, as you can see in the picture, we are talking about a vast area. We are talking about an area that covers 2,600 square kilometers. So, as you can see here, the first spikes were detected at 8:40, and these spikes were detected in 7 different stations that were 46 kilometers apart. So we are talking about a potential electromagnetic weapon or source that is able to generate this kind of radio frequency induced voltage way beyond any far field or any initial far field of an antenna. I mean, the precision and the power you are required to perform this kind of attack is out of the realm of the reality. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Also, there is no current spatial distribution. As you can see, the stations in the south and the station in the north, and in between, there are many other stations that didn't report any spike. Another mitigations for this radio frequency induced voltage can be found in the firmware. The gamma tracer detects when something weird is going on with the 2 Geiger-Müller tubes and activates a bit in a status quality word that is shared also along with the readings. So this is possible. This kind of electromagnetic interference is detected with a bit that is called EMI, precisely. So there are other mitigations as well. So it's not easy to create this kind of environment in the data tracer. Then the last part is the unexpected ionization events. Again, there are several mitigations. We have vegetation, we have buildings, and it's important to mention that the Geiger-Müller tubes are windowless tubes. So it means that, for instance, the Geiger-Müller tubes that respond also to alpha and beta particles, they have some kind of mica window. They have some window that allows these low-penetrating particles to reach the gas chamber to hit or to start the ionization event. But the Geiger-Müller tubes in the gamma tracer are just responding to gamma or X-rays, high-energy ionization events. You can see that they also these Geiger-Müller tubes are operating with high voltage in the range of 400 volts to 600 volts. So the amount of electric field you have to increase or induce in the Geiger-Müller tube to create any abnormal behavior is probably more than 100 volts, because the recommended voltage, the recommended potential to operate these Geiger-Müller tubes is 500. So it's crazy. There is no electromagnetic weapon that can perform this kind of operation in the far field. We are talking about tens of kilometers. Sky leakage spoofing is something that is doable. This is what I presented in 2007, but it's prone to error, so I don't think that happened. And malware is what I think represent or potentially represent what it could be the root cause of this potential or plausible data manipulation. I reached out to Juan Andrés Guerrero Sade to look for this potential malware, but based on the reverse engineering analysis I performed of the software, but as expected, nothing was found. The central processing station disappeared. You can see this in the paper. Allegedly, it was stolen by the Russians when they were leaving, but it's interesting that precisely this server was missing. Conclusions. Well, basically what we have seen. From our nuclear perspective, nuclear physics perspective, it is not possible to explain these radiation spikes. So they were plausible, fabricated. There is something that I can't explain, and this is why. I mean, during the radiological incident in the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, there were two events that attracted all the headlines. First, the radiation spikes, and then the Russian digging trenches in the Red Forest. Coincidentally, just one of these events has been investigated. I don't know the reason, but the kind of effort that required investigating these trenches was high. They took samples, they sent the samples to be analyzed. However, nothing can be found about the radiation spikes. Obviously, as I mentioned, my opinion is irrelevant, but, well, I've been working on this for quite a few times, so I do have one, but I don't want to speculate too much. But I don't think this is a technical issue. I don't think the experts of the IAEA were more worried about a trench rather than about the Chernobyl spikes. But what I think that happened is that they silently concluded those spikes never happened. As I see it, again, this is not a technical issue, but likely a geopolitical one. And that's it. Thank you very much for attending this session.